I am Tenitra Batiste, and you know what? 198 yards from a whole unit versus 168 yards from one bad man. Numbers never lie.
I'm Tori McElhaney, the senior reporter for the Atlanta Falcons, and I may have gotten home at 4:30 in the morning last night, but it's all good because the youth movement on defense is alive and well in Atlanta.
I'm Aaron Freeman, and Therapy Mondays are so much better after a Falcons win.
I'm Jarvis Davis. I'm just here so I won't get fined, but I'm happy though.
ATL! ATL! Rise up, A-Town. It's the Falcons Squad. Everything Atlanta Falcons every week. Breaking down all the big hits and game-changing plays from the ATL. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. Straight from the ATL, the Falcons Squad Show starts now.
Welcome to the Falcons Squad Show, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Locked On Falcons host Aaron Freeman, Locked On analyst Jarvis Davis, and Falcons senior reporter Tori McElhaney. The Squad Show is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And a W in the chat, thanks to the Falcons reestablishing the run game. We'll talk about it. And special teams was very special for the Falcons Sunday. We'll download on that and what the Falcons need to do so week 3 this season doesn't look like week 18 from last. But let's talk about the Falcons. Young Bucks, as Tori mentioned in the opener, getting it done in a 22-6 win over the Minnesota Vikings Sunday night. But let me tell you, Tori, one thing about me is, and this is in my personal life as well as my professional life, if you ask me the number one thing I wanted in a relationship, I would say is consistency. Like, I play 0 games with be who you are every single day, even on your off day. Yeah. See, but notice where I'm going.
Let's go, T. I'm talking about this. What I'm talking about. I'm fired up already. Let's go.
Here. So that's what made my heart happy for the Falcons faithful. The consistency in defense that they've craved for so long. And you started to see it last night. You posted an article talking a little bit about it with Billy Bowman, for example, and the fact that, hey, 1 week getting a sack, 1 week getting an interception, right? That's the kind of consistency you want to see, like the evolution there, where it's just sacks on sacks on sacks throughout the game. That was consistency that I love to see. And on the guy who put the QB on the ground last week coming up for a takeaway, that's the consistency. That also happens because I believe of how defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich utilized his weapons start to finish. But for you, and even something like Brick playing 9 guys in the rotation last night, let's go back to it now that you maybe, since 4:30 in the morning, have had a chance to look at the film. What did you like about the way he schemed last night?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that he used his guys well. And I also think that to a certain extent, and this is something that I've talked to Jeff Ulbrich about, it's something I've talked to Dean Pease about, like when he was here in Atlanta, something I talked with Ryan Nielsen about is like, there's only so far scheme can take you. Like, yes, there are certain blitzes that you can put together that just catches an offense off guard, like 100%. And while the Falcons are utilizing a lot of blitzes in their defensive attack, which kudos to Jeff Ulbrich there are certain times where a guy is just winning a one-on-one, like point blank period. And that's what the Falcons have been missing for the last few years defensively up front, is that like you didn't have guys consistently winning their one-on-ones up front, even in a blitzing scenario. So I think that like that to me is one, pat on the back to Jeff Ulbrich.
Sure.
Putting the guys in the right position, but also pat on the back to the guys for winning their one-on-ones up front. But I also think that to your point about consistency, and this was kind of the main thing that I took out of that game last night from a defensive perspective, is you saw from week 1 to week 2 a difference in finishing and execution.
Yes.
I thought that it was very obviously something that we talked about in week 1. I mean, we probably even talked about it on this podcast, on the show. I know I did on my shows on Atlanta Falcons Podcast Network as well, but like the defense was a millisecond away from interceptions on multiple occasions in week 1. They were milliseconds away from bringing down Baker Mayfield in the backfield, and instead he scrambles for 40 some odd yards, like collectively. So they were so close in week 1 that you felt going into week 2 that if that wasn't a mirage, if it wasn't just a week 1 showing, that this could be a defense that could wreak some havoc. And you saw them finishing these plays. You saw them getting hands on the ball. You saw them getting after JJ McCarthy and bringing him down on the ground. And I think that, to your point, is like, I think what's really funny is people talking about this, like this defense, but it's like they showed up in week 1 too. They just didn't actually, like, again, they were like a half step away from these moments, these leaky moments, these non-interception moments being huge momentum swings. Well, those happened on Sunday night in week 2. And I think that it's not like there were these major tweaks being made. It just, guys just clicked. It just clicked for guys.
Yeah. And I think, Tori, that's a great point too, because my mind went back to not just week 1, but I think on this podcast, we've been talking about it really, unfortunately, for the last couple of years, those moments in time where it's like, just wrap him up and get the tackle, just get the guy, not just the QB, but just get the guy on the ground. Or, hey, when you know what's coming, don't just be a half inch away from the interception, get in position to get a half inch closer or 6 inch closer, or a foot closer to actually make the interception happen. Or even, to your point, the times last week where we saw maybe them not getting home. And Jarvis, I want to say, I'm going to stretch the definition of not getting home, because I don't want it to just sit at the feet of 6 sacks. Because when you talk about the first half pressure rate and the fact that it was the highest in a half for the Falcons, most in a decade, you got to talk about the fact that does get you QB pressures. That does get you tackles for loss. That does give you passes defense. So it's really the whole piece of the consistency across the board that you saw. And Jarvis, I'm going to keep using your word, hopefully throughout the course of the season, just an elevation that made all the difference.
Absolutely. And when you think about it too, here's another thing that as I went back and watched the game again, I was just like he was going up against the quarterback whisperer, Kevin O'Connell. You know, he knows everything about quarterbacks. He's so confident. It doesn't matter who he has at quarterback. He can make any quarterback come to life and ball out, you know, all that stuff. So, like, this how bad Jeff Ulbrich and his defense made a Kevin O'Connell coached offense look. People are starting to question whether or not JJ can't even remember his doggone name.
McCarthy.
JJ McCarthy.
They rendered him
it's the quarterback of the future, right? Like, they were like, "Oh, should they give Kirk Cousins a call? Should they make that phone call? Because you know this team is built to win right now. So there should be some reasoning why they should question this guy at this moment, because it's been 6 quarters of bad football, but you were just praising him and going crazy last week because of the way he played just in the 4th quarter alone. So when you think about it from that aspect, it's just like, I know we've always, not we, I'm going to speak any French right now. The city of Atlanta has been on the other side of the coaching acumen, or the guys that put their guys in the right position to do well, or Andy Reid has always been a guy to never lose back-to-back games because he's willing to make those necessary adjustments leading up to that. We saw all of that. Whether it be on the offensive side of the football saying, hey, we're going to run the football, or, yeah, we're close. We're right where we need to be. We just got to make those plays. We got to just get 2 of them. That's all we got to do. And you're talking about the difference in the football game, and that's what happened last night. So, yeah, kudos to Jeff Ulbrich for out-coaching Kevin O'Connell. Yep, I said it.
Right, Bert, drop the mic. So, Aaron, I think for me, again, it's that consistency. And can I just add this? I think Jarvis makes a great point about the fact that there were so many people lauding what JJ McCarthy did for half a quarter to bring the Vikings back to get a win over the Bears last Sunday. But what I liked about this Sunday, going back to my theme of consistency, is we've been talking about youth, right? And wow, this is McCarthy's rookie season in de facto, if you will. But there were players on this team who were rookies and de facto rookies that showed up and deserve some credit for what they were able to do in only their 2nd full game or their 5th full game as an NFL player as well. And I don't want to kind of get away from that. And I'll even stretch it just a little, because I know sometimes we talk about the rookies, if you will, but like a Zach Harrison. So I think that you got to give credit if you're in that kind of 0 to 3 year phase for the Falcons and what you're seeing, because this is the kind of thing that you're going to need. Not that you didn't love what you saw from Leonard Floyd, not that you didn't love what you saw from Divine Diablo, but it's the players that you invest in the draft that when they begin to show dividends, even if it's early returns, the consistency and the dividends paying off, that's got to be encouraging.
Yeah, I think this is the bet that the Falcons made. And I know going into the season, I talked about this on Locked On Falcons, betting on young players is risky because young players tend to be very inconsistent. But the Falcons were very confident after last year, where they refused to bet on their young guys, that, they would go reverse course on that, and that Jeff Ulbrich and company and Nate Ollie and all those guys would be able to get these young guys ready to play.
Yeah.
And through 2 games, they have been able to get these guys ready to play. And you saw that a number of them making plays on Sunday night. And T, as you mentioned, we'll spend so much time talking about the actual rookies, the 4 defensive players, and Jalen Walker, James Pierce, Xavier Watson, Billy Bowman, who all had sort of those signature plays with sacks and interceptions in this game. But I think it's a great point that you also had, those second-year guys in Brandon Dorlus and Ruka Roro, third-year guys in Zach Harrison, et cetera, also sort of stepping up in this game. I'll even give D. Alford some love as like a 4th-year guy, where like he was thrown to the wolves out there with AJ Terrell going down, and it's like, hey, this, exercise some of the demons of the past with the Minnesota Vikings with D. Alford and whatnot, and not necessarily going out there and showing some of those things that we've seen in previous outings against the Vikings. And so like you got a lot of these young guys playing at a high level. And that's the difference, right? Because, as good as David Onyemata and Leonard Floyd and Caden Ellis and all these veteran players were on Sunday night, they're not in the primes of their careers. They're not necessarily the guys that I think you can sit there and say, oh, we have Fred Warner, we have, Quinnen Williams, we have, these high level players that can kind of carry a defense in a lot of ways, in terms of what those guys are bringing to the table. And so you need some of these, first year, second year, third year, et cetera, players to kind of step up and make the impact plays, get the tackles, get the run stuffs, get the TFLs and the sacks and the pressures. And you saw that pretty consistently on Sunday Night Football. And, the question, moving forward is going to be, is this going to be something that the Falcons can sustain week to week? Or is it going to be this sort of inconsistent roller coaster that typically comes with young players? But so far, the results have been very, very good for the Atlanta Falcons. And I'm expecting, that to continue over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. And Tori, another fun fact in what we saw from this Falcons defense was the fact that, and of course, unfortunately, we saw it on the offensive side against the Falcons, but this was the first game of this NFL season with no touchdowns in the first half. But I want to look at it from the defensive perspective, because I think that's a good look. Why do you feel that the Falcons were able to have so much success in making the red zone a challenge for that Vikings offense last night?
I mean, it's kind of like one side of the same coin, to your point. Like the Vikings defense made the red zone a challenge for the Falcons offense. Like it was very, I actually go back to something that I asked Michael Penix about in his post-game press conference after the game. I specifically asked, like when the field shortens and you're in the red zone and y'all obviously weren't able to punch it in until the waning minutes of the fourth quarter, like what was going on? Like what was the problem or the issues there? And I mean, he was very honest. He was like, I mean, the Vikings just out executed us. And I think they were playing to a clip and to a degree that the Falcons weren't really tapping into inside the 20. And I think that same thing can be said if it's JJ McCarthy on the other side, that the Falcons defense really turned it on inside the red area. And once because I think about like when those back-to-back sacks happened with Rook and Jalen Walker, Leonard Floyd getting in on the party, like all of those moments happened on the Atlanta side of the 50-yard line. And, I think that that just goes to show you're bearing down a bit more and you're turning it on. So I don't have like having not gone back and like watched it, I don't think I can say exactly like what was going on inside the 20-yard line for either team on either side. But just from, the context clues and haven't seen it myself, like I think it really was just there was a different mentality when they got into the red area that showed up in the intensity of what they were doing with their blitzes.
Yeah.
I think just being oh goodness. I haven't seen your last opportunities. There we go.
Party.
Well, little Tori looking at me like I was about to have a stroke. No, I'm not. I'm good.
That was funny.
I'm cool. But no, I think it's taking advantage of teams' mistakes, right? Like because they had the pre-snap penalty. And then they moved them back, and then you had Jalen Walker come out and do his thing. That was such a see, Tori. I know you're feeling really good right now because to see a former dog come off the edge like that made me happy. Like I know, but that
it
made
was
me
funny.
happy.
It was funny because Jaywalk was asked in the in the locker room after the game, like about his like touchdown celebration. He was like, I mean, I've been doing that for years at UGA, and I'm sitting there like, yeah, he has.
Yes, he has. They watched every doggone game, and now that's the move. That's the selling, baby.
Yeah.
But that was a beautiful thing to watch. And then like the next play, we're taking advantage of you again because you made a mistake, and that's the thing that you have to that are so key when you're in the red zone because all the windows are tight. Like there's minimal room for error when you're talking about making throws in tight windows and being able and making your blocks or making those rushes a little bit tighter, a little bit cleaner, so you can get there just a little bit quicker because everything speeds up so much once you get down in that area. So yeah, I think it was a big it was shout out to the Falcons for taking advantage of the mistakes that JJ was making down there.
Yeah, I think Jarvis nailed it with saying we're being opportunistic. I think
appreciate you, sir.
You had the play where JJ sort of fumbled the snap and then that threw off the timing of the play. So you had an incomplete pass there. Then you had the delay of game that pushed him back 5 yards. And that's when Jalen Walker got his sack. That's when the Falcons got their sack. And so it was one of those situations where the Vikings had no problem sort of driving all the way down to the 2-yard line. And then they kind of shot themselves in the foot with some mistakes. And the Falcons basically made them pay for that. And so I think that was kind of the key there when you have the ability that the Falcons showed throughout the entire evening of being able to control the line of scrimmage, being able to get pressure on the quarterback, like those opportunities, like the Vikings are going to be sitting here rewatching the film being like, man, we really kind of, lost an opportunity there to score with the position that we were in, and that would have potentially changed the entire landscape of the game at that point in time, and the Falcons kind of made them pay. So I think that's the thing that you're looking for. That's the thing, again, was what we were expecting to see from this team with some of the investments that they made this offseason, where it was like, is this going to be a defense that is going to absolutely shut down opposing teams? The expectation was not really, but there'll be an opportunistic defense. But we saw on this particular evening, not only were they shutting down the Vikings for the most part in this game, but they also were very opportunistic. So you got the best of both worlds.
Indeed. And the Falcons reestablished their run identity Sunday night. We'll take that under further review. This episode of our Falcons Squad Show is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app where making the right call can actually pay off. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right means cashing in. With football back, Prize Picks is that simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections, and you can turn your takes into real prizes all in less than 60 seconds. So if you like checking projections, that's a good look for you. Maybe you wanted to check to see what it was going to look like for Bijan Robinson. Well, on the ground and in the air, he did his thing because he had some critical catches out of the backfield, but also, of course, the ground game was on point. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And there are some cool discounts, some max discounts that you can take advantage of with Prize Picks, including max discounts like on yesterday, Travis Kelce, 0.5 receiving yards, but this upcoming Sunday, Patrick Mahomes, 0.5 passing yards. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. So, Aaron, the Falcons only had 69 yards total rushing in week 1, but whoa, did they ever turn it around this Sunday? They had 65 in the first quarter alone, 97 in the first half. It was just an absolutely ridiculous display of we're going to do what we do, and to the tune of 218 yards total rushing for the game. Good to see the Falcons get back to that. But for you, when you kind of look back at it, what do you think changed with how the run game was able to succeed this week?
Well, I think first and foremost, the offensive line played a lot better. You saw that reflected not only with their ability to spring some of the longer runs, but also their ability to win in short yardage in this game compared to last week. I think, going back to an observation Tori made last week on the show when we talked about the struggles of the run game and sort of how it was kind of siloed, where you had Tyler Algier running the outside zone stuff and Bijan running all the other stuff like the inside runs and whatnot. And I think you saw a healthier mix of that, where the run game wasn't as predictable for the opposing defenses to be like, oh, well, Algier's back there, so they're going to run this or whatever. And so you had that sort of mix to keep defenses more on their toes. And, we know that this team's bread and butter is running the outside zone, is why Algier was a little bit more efficient and effective last week. And then, you run more of that stuff with Bijan Robinson. It's like, he's making guys miss in the open field and whatnot, and doing his thing. And then, I thought the other element that was interesting was how much 12 personnel the Falcons ran in this game, the two tight end sets, where, I feel like I'm always vindicated on the show, where it's like, oh, you get a fullback in the offense and all of a sudden the run game looks really good. You had Charlie Warner back there as the lead blocker and whatnot, Tegan Cotoriano, Kyle Pitts, all these guys. And so I think the Falcons had a little bit of a different wrinkle this week. But I think the main thing was they were leaning on their strengths, and you got to see the good players in this Falcons, offensive line and tight end room that have been sort of the engine for their rushing success in the previous years, played really, really well. And that's what you need from this run game. It's not as if the Falcons have, 5 or 6 elite run blockers. It's like they have a handful of elite run blockers. And when those guys are doing elite run blocking, it's like, oh, this offense looks a lot better when they are able to run the football.
Yeah. And Jarvis, for you, when you look at the effectiveness of this Falcons run offense, run game, start to finish, what were some of the things that you saw that you felt were a little bit different from how Zac Robinson approached that in the first game versus, say, how you saw him approach it this game against the Vikings?
I mean, I think the guys played better. Aaron talks about the elite run blocker. Like, one of those guys is Chris Lindstrom. And Chris was a maniac last night. That man was all balls to the wall when it comes to getting on his blocks and sustaining those bad boys, and just, hey, I'm gonna hold this bad boy to the doggone whistle. Like, you're not going anywhere. And I think that was so consistent. Chris Lindstrom, he played amazing. He played so much better than he did in that first game. And I think and to be honest with you, I really think these guys took that game personal last week, because, even though Caleb McGarry is one of those elite running blockers, yep, I said elite and Caleb McGarry in the same sentence, it shouldn't be that big of a drop-off, right? If one of their guys goes down. So I felt like Dwayne Leopard sent the message, say, hey, guys, this is unacceptable. We can't have this, and we're going to run the football. And just the confidence that Raheem Morris spoke to, like, leading up to this game. He's like, we're going to run the ball. Like, this is what we're going to do. Because guess what? When you're on the road, you know what silence crowds? Not necessarily throwing the ball all over the yard and big plays, 4 or 5 yards a pop. That will silence the crowd. I know Tori was there. I heard it through the TV. Them folks were quiet when they was in that last drive in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I know you could hear pins dropping in the stadium last night, Tori.
Yeah, no, I was gonna make a note of that. That final drive that was, probably 12 plays and Tyler Algier gets in the end zone. Granted, they did let him in the end zone but still that drive itself, from the start of it to the end of it, like that fourth quarter starts on a sack fumble. And so that already silenced everything. But then, the Falcons don't really have that great of a drive coming out of that sack fumble, but then Minnesota goes 3 and out. So it really, after that, so like that final drive where the Falcons have, 6.5 minutes to run the ball, burn clock, like you knew you were going to run the ball. You're in a situation where they are going to run the ball. And I thought that the fact that you had Bijan, Tyler, it was just one after the other. And it was what makes this run game so successful in the past. And to the point of what y'all were saying, like, I made note of all of that too. The use of 12 personnel, the healthier mix in run plays between Algier and Bijan and what was being called, like guys just blocking better up front. I thought that Matthew Bergeron had a much better outing. Jake Matthews had a much better outing as they were running to the left. Like I just thought overall the execution from start to finish was better. Like, of course, they had some moments here and there, but that's going to happen. But I think for the most part, I was really pleased with the changes in the run game that you saw. And I do think that I can say all of those things. And I think play calling goes into it. I think personnel goes into it, all of that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing, and it goes back to something both Free and Jarvis hit on, is the fact that this offensive line was challenged to be better. And kind of take into the point of what Jarvis was saying, taking it personal that they only rushed for 69 yards against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in week 1. And I think you pissed Chris Lindstrom off. And I think an angry Chris Lindstrom is a terrifying person to play across from. Like we're not talking about a bunch of scrubs in the Minnesota Vikings interior defensive line now. Like that's a group that against the Chicago Bears were playing with their hair on fire. Like, but this Falcons offensive line came with a point to prove, and I think they proved it.
Yeah. Now, Aaron, it wasn't all roses exactly last night. It wasn't all happy, joy, because just like we talked about in the segment before, this was the first game in the NFL season with no touchdowns in the first half, meaning nor did the Falcons punch it in that first half. So if we kind of go back, now that you've had a chance to kind of decompress on it, why do you feel like the red zone was such a challenge for the Falcons offense last night?
Well, I don't know if there was anything specific other than the old cliches when it comes down to the red zone, which is it's just harder to move the ball because the spacing is harder to get by. And I think the Vikings did a good job in this game, like we saw Tampa Bay doing an effective job, which is, they kind of took away the deep ball with some of their coverages. And so the Falcons weren't as prone to attacking vertically. And so when you get into this sort of dink and dunk offense like the Falcons were in for the most part in this game, and then once you get to the red zone and, you saw the Falcons having a lot of success running the ball through between the 20s, but then once you get into the red zone and you're okay, if you're the Vikings, like we don't have to worry about the deep ball now, and so now we can drop that safety into the box, and that's going to give us an extra help in terms of stopping the run. And you saw that like the Falcons run game kind of ground to a halt in the red zone. So all of these factors are just typical factors that happen for most NFL teams, and unfortunately for the Falcons, they just weren't quite able to execute. I think some of it is owed to Michael Penix and the receivers being just a little bit off in their timing and rhythm with some of the throws. Like there was a throw to Ray McLeod in the end zone where he was running an out and he kind of settled as opposed to running to the pylon, and Penix threw it to the pylon. And if Ray had sort of exploded out of that break, he may have been in a position to make that catch. And it's plays like that you just look back and like, oh, not to bring up the old adage, but these are maybe some of the rust that maybe a preseason. But hey,
Stop being petty, man.
But like
petty Mondays.
These are some of the things that maybe guys getting a little bit more reps together in the summer. But you didn't hear that from me. Maybe benefit.
Yeah, I think. For me, I feel like this was not only in the red zone, like anywhere on the field. I think the pass protection was a little suspect last night because you had a guy like Jonathan Grenard and then the interior guys and Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargraves. Like, yeah, you're going to get us in this run game. Oh, we all drive at the pass. We're going to show you where it's coming from. And those guys were getting after it. Jalen Redmond as well. The undrafted free agent guy just out there just making a whole bunch of noise up front. So I think that was the big thing, just like it was for – it's so crazy how these offenses kind of mirrored each other as far as the struggles go, as far as protecting the passer. And it just in certain moments, it just felt like they just couldn't block those guys. And I think that, when you have guys like that, when you have – that Brian Flores type system and having those guys, 4, 5, 6 guys up there front, you got to get the protections correct. And Ryan Newsler in his first year doing that, right, and being responsible for that, and with Michael Penix as well back there. So I think those are some of the things that you have to kind of work themselves out. And like Free said, maybe you could have worked out in the preseason, but hey, high science 2020 right, at this point. But so I feel like, as the season goes along, I feel like that will be better because I feel like, Jake Matthews, Grenard got the best of him, but Jake is Jake. Like, he's not going to be like that. Like, I feel like the consistency is there for him. He's just long-term marriage, you know what I'm saying? Like type of material, you know what I'm saying, at that left tackle spot. So I'm not too concerned about that. It's just a matter of making sure when you face defenses like that, those exotic guys, those guys who are just running folks up into the line of scrimmage and dropping out of there right before the ball is snapped. Those are some of the things that Ryan Newsler and Michael Penix going to have to be on the same page. And I feel like they were able to work through it because the foundation of this offense, which I said coming into this season, is going to be running the football and getting the ball to 7 as many times as possible. And they were able to do that.
Yeah, I think in terms of like what was going on in the past game, I think that honestly it's twofold. It was what was happening in the back end and it was what was happening up front. Like what was happening in the back end, I think we've already made mention to it, is they were taking away the deep threat. But what was happening up front made it to where there were a lot of receivers who couldn't even get to the top of their routes by the time that Michael Penix was under duress. And I think that was very obvious and very evident in the first half specifically in how they were attacking Michael Penix. It felt like play after play after play, he's having to kind of just check down to Bijan because there just wasn't enough time for anything else to develop downfield. And, I do think that it's not the end of the world that didn't manifest. I think you kind of knew going into this game that Brian Flores and this Vikings defense was going to get theirs. Like you knew it was not going to be an easy road to victory if they could get to victory. Like that was something that I didn't really expect a lot. Like, I don't want to say I didn't expect a lot from the offense because that doesn't sound good. But I think just in terms of the matchup and in terms of kind of what we saw Tampa Bay do, taking the top off the defense, or taking the top away from Michael Penix and the deep threat. Like, I just think that that's something that could carry over into what the Vikings were doing. So I did think that this was going to be a heavy ground game usage, specifically because of what Brian Flores can do with his defensive front and also what was happening in the back end. So I think some of those things can be cleaned up. I think there are a couple of those moments that even Michael Penix talked about, like some of the procedural penalties because of the noise and not getting the play call in and everything like that. He was very adamant that he was like, hey, that was on me. I put that miscommunication on me. Like, I'm going to clean that up. I'm going to be better. Like, so I think that there was just kind of a lot that was playing into the pass game never really being able to get going. It wasn't like it was just like one thing. And it's like, Also, maybe we feel better if the ball, like if Drake London holds on to that ball and it's not punched out. Like that was arguably one of the best plays I thought of the entire game. If that right, like if that fumble doesn't happen, like it was you had Michael Penix rolling to his left, throwing against his body and momentum. Drake kind of coming over the top and going over his shoulder. Like, I mean, it was a beautiful play. And I really like the play design and how Michael Penix used his legs on that. But it's like, but the end result was a fumble. So we kind of have to like forget about that moment. But I think like if that moment is not a turnover, potentially we feel differently about it, but it was. So we have to talk about that. But like ultimately I'm not overly concerned at this point in time about the pass game and kind of the inconsistent nature of it. I think if we get to week 7, week 8, and we're still kind of talking about this start-stop nature and all of these teams taking away the deep threat and the Falcons aren't able to really get anything going, then that's like more of a conversation. But for right now, and knowing that you're going up against a Brian Flores defense with the personnel that they had, I'm okay for the time being about all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that was actually going to be my last question. So, Free, I'll ask you to wrap us up because Tori spoke on pass pro, Jarvis spoke on pass pro, and like I said, that was going to be my question. So, for you, with that pass protection that you saw last night that wasn't exactly top tier, are you concerned about it at this point, or do you feel like, to Tori's point, let's hold kind of our judgment on it until we see maybe more iterations of it?
There's a little concern. It feels like particularly that left side has given up a few too many pressures off of stunts. And it's a little frustrating given that like Matthews and Bergeron, they're going into year 3 together and, they haven't done a great job. And, as Jarvis said, it's not really a Jake Matthews issue, not to throw Matthew Bergeron under the bus, but it's like Jake's not the problem. Jake's done this for a long time. So, Bergeron, it feels like when teams are running stunts to that side, the Falcons have been susceptible to that over the first 2 games. And so you want to see that get cleaned up. So there is some concern when it comes to that. But we'll just sort of have to wait and see if that continues to be a problem or that's something that they can fix. It's a fixable problem, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Well, clearly special teams was fixable because they were much more special last night. We'll unpack that in Next Up. This episode of our Falcons Squad Show is brought to you by Game Time. BetterHelp, that is. So let's talk about BetterHelp. Let's talk about the fact that today's show, we like to say Monday is actually a therapy day for the Falcons Squad Show. But real talk, we're not really licensed professionals or trained professionals. And sometimes we all talk to people who aren't. Our barista, our barber, even the random stranger in the bathroom. But again, not everyone is the right person to give you real support for your issues. That's why BetterHelp is here. With over 30,000 licensed therapists and more than 10 years of experience, BetterHelp helps you find your right match, someone clinically trained and credentialed to guide you through life's challenges. So think about this. You might say that you start a simple questionnaire and you're saying to yourself, okay, is this really going to have an impact or change my life? Well, yes, it is. Because when you start the simple questionnaire with BetterHelp, there's a matching there that works for you. They're trying to find the right fit for you. And here's the good news. You fill out that questionnaire, you get a therapist. Maybe it's not the right fit. No worries, because you can switch therapists at any time at no additional cost. And of course, the flexibility is so important because everyone's on the go. We're always traveling from point A to point B here in Atlanta. And you can join sessions online from your home or on the go and just make that therapy fit into your schedule. So as the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. So find the one with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So we know that the Falcons announced their inactives, Jarvis, and we know Younghoe Koo is at the top of the list. As you mentioned last night on the post-game show, pleasant surprise, at least for some. But then you realize that as a unit, the Falcons special teams had to go without Jamal Agnew, who was injured, had to go without Ray McLeod, because he had to sub in at wide receiver. So that being said, meaning they didn't get all that they could from him in special teams, you really kind of have to look at the collective and talk about how good they did overall. So I'm going to let you guys kind of decide, after you had a chance to look at the film, what else stood out to you on what I'll say was the Falcons' remixed third unit and their performance Sunday, Jarvis.
I think the play, the elevation of play for those guys like Mike Ford recovering, the fumble and being able to, come down on that gunner, which is a very hard position to play. And I feel like, the more and more you look at it and understand how valuable it is, you understand why Marquise Williams pounded the table for a guy like that to be on that final 53. So for me, I thought there was much better play. I thought the kickoff coverage was amazing. I thought Bradley Pinion did an excellent job of dropping that ball right there in the zone. It seemed like it was so easy for him too. He was just kind of like, a little practice golf swing, kick, you know what I'm saying? Dropping that bad boy right there. And when you think about the importance of that, like guys were starting at the old school touchbacks around that time, like at 20-yard line, 25-yard line versus 35 and God forbid 40. So, when you talk about helping your defense out, and backing those guys up or keeping those guys where they need to be closer to their own end zone, I think that was the thing that just really stood out to me. And I think that guys like Bradley Pinion and also D. Alford, who ended up having to go in for AJ Terrell, but still had those special team duties as well. So when you think about having that type of those veteran guys like that I just mentioned being on your special teams, it makes you understand why guys get the table gets pounded for those guys when it comes final cut down time, because it's just so valuable when they actually out there and they know exactly what they're doing.
And Tori, for you, sort of a remix for obviously the reasons that I mentioned and Jarvis mentioned, a remix, but a bounce back for special teams from last week. So now that you've had a chance to decompress at least a little bit, maybe what were some of the other things that stood out for you other than the obvious, which would be, and you can talk Parker Romo or Mike Ford Jr. as well, but any other things that stood out for you on special teams last night?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think that the story is the obvious with the kicking game. I really do. And I think that the fact that the Falcons, have the conversation about Young Waku that we've been having for a year at this point, and they made the decision to bring in Parker Romo, which I do think was very strategic on their part to bring in a kicker who spent 11 games or however many games in that stadium in Minnesota. I think that is a very strategic move. Out of the 6 or 7 that they reportedly worked out on Tuesday of last week, they signed the guy who was with the Vikings and played at that stadium. I think that there is strategy within that. I think it's very obvious. And so I think that for me, it just goes to show, and the fact that honestly, the story couldn't have been written any better, that you won that game because of your kicking game. Yeah. You won that game because Parker Romo went 5 for 5 with a
Tori. Say that slowly. You won go ahead, Tori. Say that slowly. Because that's huge.
You won the game because of your kicker. I think that ultimately, in the context of everything that was going on, it shows that the Falcons ultimately made the right decision to go with Parker Romo and not Young Waku. And I know that's a really harsh thing to say. And look, I've appreciated covering Ku throughout my career. I have nothing but nice things to say about Ku, the person. And it's a tough business. It's really tough to see somebody who won games for the organization, who had these huge moments for the organization, fall off. But that's the thing is ultimately this is a business. If I stop doing my job to the best of my ability, I'm not around for long either. And it's unfortunately the part of life that sucks. And when you're in a position where a position truly is cut and dry, it's black and white, you either make the kick or you don't. Parker Romo made his kicks. And I think even Raheem Morris said after the game, it's like, those kicks went through the uprights. That's all you kind of need to say about it. Like, and I don't know where the kicking game goes from here, but I think like that 54-yarder specifically from Parker Romo was, I think, a big moment for this team, this organization, because one, it was very needed in the moment. Two, it was loud as heck in there. Three, the how it separated the Falcons at that point in the game from the Vikings from a score perspective. Like all of these things, like that kick alone was, because all the other ones were kind of like 33-yard chip shots or whatever the case may be. So I don't know. I think you can't talk about this game on Sunday night without talking about the kicking game and kind of the role that it played in the story of the week.
Yeah. And I think, Tori, too, the moxie that it took, because I'll be honest, I wasn't really sure what Raheem Morris was going to do with Terry Fontenot. I wasn't sure if even bringing Parker Romo onto the practice squad, if they were going to make a gutsy call to say, hey, he's the starter for this Sunday. So I think you do have to give a lot of credit for that. And understanding the importance of, yes, it is week 2. And Tori, while we don't want to go into panic mode just because they lost the first week, the game in the first week, you did lose to the divisional opponent who just so happens to keep stopping you from winning the division.
Yeah.
And it's
like all of last year too.
That's exactly what I was going to go with it. This isn't
it's not week 1 in a vacuum.
Like, it's not.
Right. And I think that's ultimately like, if, I don't even know if you're using another example of like, okay, Kirk Cousins, like from last year, like he has one game against the Chargers. If it was that one game and he was able to pick it back up, like then you could say, okay, that game happened in a vacuum. That game was a throwaway, whatever, but it didn't continue to happen. Interceptions continued to happen and the Falcons had to make a decision. Same thing with Younghoe Koo. He misses a couple of really important kicks and they keep going and it keeps spiraling. And then it's like, well, now you're in a position where you can't trust your kicker to make a 44-yarder at the end of a game. And I think that's ultimately like what it is.
Yeah. Agreed. And for you, Aaron, when you kind of look back and to see what the Falcons were able to do on special teams last night, I think it's just, and I know we talked about it somewhat last night as well, but yeah, I think it does go without saying that the more you kind of look at this, the bigger the decision to bring Parker Romo on board looms, the bigger the decision for him to actually be the starter last night, the bigger the decision for them every time they chose to, hey, let's go ahead and kick the field goal. And we don't have to kind of think. We're actually just going to go ahead and kick the field goal. And it actually works. Like all of the strategy that even led up to what you saw last night. But again, we're talking today, I think, on this show about the fact that even in special teams, it's not just the strategy of the coordinator or the head coach, it's the execution of all the players.
Yeah, I think that's basically it. As Jarvis and Tori have said, like we've talked about with some of the other areas, like the run game. Like you got a unit that underperformed in week 1 collectively. It wasn't, we focus on Koo, rightfully so, because he had this sort of big bad moment in that game at the end of that game. But it was collective poor performance from the special teams. And you wondered, okay, are they going to bounce back? Are they going to go out there and execute this week against the Vikings? You saw that with the kicking game with Romo. You saw that with the coverage units as well. And so that to me is the key for this Falcon team, that you're going to have some down performances throughout the season. That's just the nature of the NFL season. It's a roller coaster ride. And the question is going to be, can you consistently bounce back? And we saw that from this Falcon team early last year, which is why they got off to that 6-3 start, where I remember us talking about, oh, well, they haven't lost 2 games in a row. And then they lost 2 games in a row. Then they lost 3 games in a row. And then they lost 4 games in a row. And they couldn't, sort of get that rebound performance. And so that's going to be the challenge for this team this year. And you like seeing the early returns so far with, the run game improvement, the special teams improvement from week 1 to week 2. And hopefully they'll continue that we won't be sitting here, later this season being like, well, it's been 2 or 3 or 4 bad down weeks. And so I think, the rebound game from the special teams unit is a good sign for, things to come this year.
Yeah, and just like we're kind of soaking up the victory, I thought it was hilarious. Parker Romo just kind of soaking it all up kind of, hey, Leonard Floyd, nice to meet you at the end.
That was so funny. I didn't see that until I was like on the bus on the way to the airport.
Yes.
And there was like a group of us on the bus that we were all just like cackling about it. It's like life of an NFL kicker, you know, like that there is no other entity that I feel like has that type of interaction where it's like, I know Bijan, but hi, Leonard Floyd. It's really nice to meet you, my dude.
Big man.
Right. Yeah.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Well, listen, we got a game coming up this week that's going to be another critical one for this Falcons team. And listen, we want to see something different in week 3 than what we saw in week 18 last season. We'll talk about that in the look ahead. This episode of our Falcons Squad Show is brought to you by Upside. Hey, Falcons fans, are you still paying full price for gas? Well, stop. Stop leaving money behind. Get real cash back every time you fill up with the free Upside app. Simply download the free Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and start earning cash at the pump today. Use my limited time promo code Touchdown and get an extra 25 cents back per gallon on your first fill up. You can make up to $300 a year just from buying the gas you already needed. Now, at first, I thought it was too good to be true, but it's totally legit. I have tried it. It works. Real people are also getting paid just to make their daily commutes, and you can too. Plus, you can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Now, don't let this offer drive on by. Download the free Upside app now using my limited time promo code Touchdown for a limited time 25 cents per gallon bonus. That's promo code Touchdown. Offers vary by user and location. Go to upside.com for terms and conditions. So, Tori, I wanted to walk through the final the three phases of the game, and even really start with Raheem Morris, to be honest, just in terms of the Carolina Panthers. Obviously, it was a heartbreaking loss last season to end the season and end any hope that the Falcons had for a trip to the postseason. So there might be a little payback in the minds of this Atlanta Falcons team. But on the same token, it's an opportunity for you to get that first win in the division and an opportunity for us to see all of this evolution or elevation that we've seen from week 1 to 2 show us that it was for real. So T, let's start with Raheem Morris. When you look at what he needs to do, what do you want to see, if anything, in terms of course corrections from Ra?
Yeah, I think that for me in this game coming up against the Carolina Panthers, it's an opportunity for a statement to be made. And I think that is ultimately what I think I want to see from Raheem going through this week is like, and you know, I'm not in the locker room. I don't know how he motivates like his guys or anything like that. But I do think that there should be a level of, hey guys, like you're coming off of this really like gritty, gutsy performance against the Minnesota Vikings on Sunday Night Football. Keep it going, keep the momentum going, because you're playing an opponent that, let's be honest, like to end the season last year, like took advantage of you, and especially defensively. Like, I mean, you think about it, like the Falcons defense was playing better after the bye week, and you saw them, you know, being just better.
Yeah.
But then that Carolina Panthers game happens in the final week of the season. And I think that's ultimately like, you couldn't look at that and be like, you can continue with the kind of the leadership of that group that you had. It's why I think Jimmy Lake is no longer with the Falcons. Like that game was in a nutshell, the issues of the defense.
Yeah.
And I think like this is a very important opportunity for Atlanta's defense, specifically under the leadership of Raheem, Jeff Ulbrich, and kind of all of these like young pieces. If you play to I would say even a fraction of what you did against the Minnesota Vikings offense on Sunday night, it's already better than what you did in week 18 of last year.
Mm-hmm.
So like go out, make a statement defensively that, hey, we're not going to allow this to happen. Like play with a little bit of like gumption to kind of make a point defensively. I think that is like where I start when it comes to what this game and what like the conversations around this game could be coming up next Sunday up in Carolina. I mean, I just think that you need a definitive statement win to really feel good going into a week where you host the Washington Commanders at home in week 4.
Yeah, because you don't want to look at it and get to week 5 and feel like, and I'm going in reverse order, of course, because last year it was Commanders week 17, Panthers week 18.
Right.
Now it's Panthers week 3, Commanders week 4. But Jarvis, to Tori's point, like, you don't want a situation where we're talking about, them dropping 44 points on you and then really making you kind of question 44 points from the Panthers, 30 points from the Commanders, and then you're starting to question, like, okay, did I see what I saw in week 2? You really do want to have that sort of statement win in week 3 to say, no, it wasn't a fluke. This is who we are. This is what the identity of this defense is. But that does start with Raheem Morris. So were there any things that you saw here in week 2 that you want just a little bit of a course correction for week 3?
No, not really, because here's the thing. I feel like, when now let me start right here. It depends on whether AJ Terrell is going to be there or not, right? Because we saw how Bryce Young just carved up this Falcons defense last year, and it was just absolutely ugly. And when you think about the defense and how I feel like they changed the narrative on JJ McCarthy, I feel like they need to be able to change the narrative on Bryce Young. Make him look like they made a mistake trading for him, a 5'11" quarterback who weighs 185 pounds. Like that's the thing that you want to do when it comes to defense. And I feel like this defense overall, they have something to prove, period. Because I remember all y'all folks who listen to this show and talk about the Falcons on time online, y'all weren't feeling Jeff Ulbrich. You weren't feeling that. And for him to come in and do what he's been doing in these first couple of games, right? Yeah, there were some things to be corrected in that first game. Sure, no doubt. Make the plays. Hey, we got to make these plays. Hey, they did that. Now it's a matter of how consistent can we be? Not saying that I should expect 6 sacks, 3 turnovers every game, but it shouldn't fall to 0 sacks and no turnovers. Like, it has to be some. You gotta have to build that consistency, and I think that's the thing that Raheem Morris needs to continue to preach, along with Jeff Ulbrich as well.
And so, Free, I'll go with you on that one as well. We're talking about Coach Ra, we're talking about Brick. What are some of the course corrections that you need to see from them in order for this to be? And I like where Tori and Jarvis went with it, so I'm going to stay there for this to be a statement game.
Yeah, I think going back to last year's Week 18 game, it did feel like the Falcons kind of let their foot off the gas. They're like, oh, we're playing the Panthers, and we'll rush 3 and drop 8 because Bryce Young, it was basically the same game plan they had for Desmond Ridder a couple of weeks earlier against the Raiders, where it's like, yeah, we don't respect this quarterback, and so we're not worried about it. And Bryce Young carved them up, and I think the challenge is going to be, I don't think Jeff Ulbrich is going to take that approach. I'm pretty confident saying that, but
feel pretty confident. Not a chance.
Yeah, so I'm pretty confident that they'll be much more aggressive, and I think if they can, again, obviously I would love to get 6 sacks and 3 turnovers, like Jarvis said, but if they can get somewhere close to that number, I think that will be a great opportunity to basically say, okay, because complacency always sets in. Like, you beat a tough Vikings team on the road. You got, Carolina has struggled these first couple of weeks. You go into Carolina, this will be an easy game. We'll win it. Again, you don't want to have that same mentality that you had, in my opinion, going into that Week 18 game last year. And you want to have that statement. So you want to keep your foot on the gas defensively. You want to be able to shut down this Panthers run game, because I think Bryce Young had like 55 passes last week because they fell behind in that game. And they're going to try to get to be more balanced on offense this week. So you need to see this defense, this coaching staff, keep the pressure up on their players and basically say, yes, what you did against Minnesota was impressive, but it's only the beginning. It's something that you can build off of, not necessarily the end game for what you're trying to do, so that hopefully we'll see this, team go out there and make that statement and go out there. We know division games are always close, but you kind of want to see this Falcon team go out there and say, okay, this is the game that we should have had in week 18. This is the type of game that we should have had in week 1. That sort of statement where the Falcons can go out there and really kind of dominate the Panthers in the ways that I think a lot of people think when this team is playing their best football, they're capable of doing.
Yeah, and real quick, Tori, Jarvis, Aaron, any course corrections you want to see from Zac Robinson?
Play action?
Yeah. I mean, like, don't be too obvious. Like, that's my pet peeve when it comes to play calling, because, you know, a lot of people want to say, oh, play calling. Like, for me, as long as I understand what you're trying to accomplish, right, I'm good. But you can't get it to a place where you have that tight 12 personnel and you got 25 in the game and it's 3rd and short, and it's just like, hey, man, yeah, you've been able to get it, but sometimes you got to switch it up, pull the ball out, and just a little quick dump to your 6'6" tight end, you know what I'm saying, who's playing really well for you, you know? So, like, reward the man, because that man was out there blocking. Kyle Pitts was out there blocking, folks. So, yeah, sometimes it's not all about scheme. Sometimes it's just about the players. Okay, all right, we've been running in this particular formation. Kyle has been doing well as far as blocking. You know, we've been able to convert some of these short yardage situations. Let's switch it up just a little bit. We might be able to get an unexplosive, or we might be able to score, you know, get into the end zone. So, yeah, just that little thing, like right there, are the things that kind of help you get to a space where you want to be in is offensively. And that is going back to what I said leading up to the season on previous shows, at least 28 points a game. You give this defense 28 points a game, the way they're playing right now, hey, you're going to be in a good spot halfway through the season.
Yeah. I go back and forth because I'm just like, I want to see them. Well, I'll just say this, like, continue to run the crap out of the ball. You know, like, if no one's going to stop you, continue to do it. Like, and, you know, find some interesting wrinkles in there, like, and continue kind of building on the success that you had against the Vikings with running the ball, and, you know, fix some things in the red zone, and, you know, maybe add a couple wrinkles here and there in the red zone, and maybe get in the end zone. Like, those, like, I know it sounds simple, like, but like, I don't know, like, I don't really have that much without having gone and, like, truly watched it. Like, I don't really have any, like, key notes for Zac Robinson other than just, like, if you want to run the snot out of the ball, like, against Carolina, do it. Like, if it's working, do it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if it's one of those where we truly think about the cliche of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it is not broke it by any stretch of the imagination. So if you've got to tweak it a little bit, do that. But yeah, no fixing necessary in that run game. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Falcons Squad Show your first listen of the day, including 2 of our longtime everydayers. I have to give them a shout out because they just texted me to say that they thought we did fantastic last night, and that Matt had the podcast on. This is Matt Baker and Jasmine Taylor Baker. They had the podcast on last night, and they said, well, I look fantastic. They really love the do-rag look for the guys. So I just needed to give Aaron and Jarvis Tori some love because they are rocking the do-rags in honor of MPX doing his thing. So thanks to those guys for always holding us down. And of course, be sure to stop by Locked on Falcons with your host, Aaron Freeman, as your second listen. You can catch Jarvis as a frequent contributor for Locked on Falcons, and check out some of Tori's great work at AtlantaFalcons.com. We'll see you next time.